Welcome back to Exposure Stories. Marie Osmond's life has often been presented as the definition of American success. As part of the famous Marie Osmond family, she grew up surrounded by television cameras, hit records, sold-out performances, and a carefully maintained public image that portrayed the Osmonds as wholesome perfection. But behind the polished smile and stage lights was a childhood marked by pressure, emotional isolation, and trauma that followed her for decades. Born Olive Marie Osmond on October 13, 1959, in Ogden, Marie was the only daughter among 9 children in a deeply religious Mormon household. Her parents, Olive and George Osmond, dedicated the family's life to entertainment, transforming the children into performers from an incredibly young age. Music rehearsals, television appearances, and constant work became the center of daily life. Privacy, individuality, and ordinary childhood experiences were often pushed aside in favor of discipline and performance. Even as a little girl, Marie understood that maintaining the family's image mattered more than personal comfort. While audiences saw smiling children singing harmonies on television, Marie later revealed that she often felt emotionally overwhelmed and unable to express her own fears or needs. As the Osmond brothers became national stars during the 1960s, Marie initially remained in the background, but stepping into show business eventually became unavoidable. By age 4, she had already appeared on television, beginning a career that would consume nearly every part of her life. Although fame brought admiration and success, it also exposed her to emotional pressures no child should have to carry. In her memoirs, Marie later explained that she grew up believing work always came first. She remembered asking to play outside like other children only to be told there was no time because rehearsals, recordings, and performances were more important. The family's reputation depended on everyone doing their part. That pressure intensified as she entered adolescence and began building a career of her own. Unlike her brothers who focused on pop music, Marie chose country music, and in 1973 her single, Paper Roses, became a massive success, launching her into stardom as an independent artist rather than simply the Osmonds' little sister. Yet even as her public success exploded, Marie was privately struggling with deep emotional wounds tied to childhood abuse. For years she spoke only vaguely about the trauma, explaining that someone close to the family had mistreated her when she was very young. She clarified repeatedly that the abuser was not a family member, but the experience permanently altered how she viewed the world and herself. The abuse left her carrying fear, shame, confusion, and distrust at an age when she barely understood what was happening. Like many survivors from her generation, Marie stayed silent because she believed speaking up would only create pain and humiliation for her family. She later revealed that she had been threatened into silence and convinced that exposing the abuse would destroy everything her parents had worked so hard to build. Because the Osmonds were viewed publicly as America's perfect family, the emotional burden became even heavier. She felt trapped between maintaining that image and privately coping with experiences she could not process. The trauma affected nearly every aspect of her emotional development. Marie later admitted that as a child she became frightened of men and deeply uncomfortable around them. The abuse distorted her understanding of trust, safety, and even identity. At one point during her youth, she questioned whether she might be gay, not because she genuinely understood her sexuality, but because the trauma had created such intense fear and revulsion toward men that she instinctively distanced herself from them emotionally. Years later, while speaking publicly about these experiences, she explained that the confusion came from psychological trauma rather than identity itself. At the time, however, she had no language or support system to help her understand what she was experiencing internally. Instead, she buried those feelings while continuing to perform for millions of people as though everything in her life was perfectly fine. As her fame increased during the 1970s through the hugely successful Donnie and Marie television show with her brother Donnie Osmond, the emotional strain intensified. Behind the scenes, Marie faced brutal criticism about her appearance despite already being extremely thin. Television executives humiliated her over her weight, reportedly calling her obese even when she weighed barely over 100 pounds. The comments devastated her self-esteem and triggered dangerous eating habits. She survived on starvation diets and became obsessed with maintaining the unrealistic standards demanded by television producers. At the same time, she endured exhausting work schedules that often stretched close to 20 hours a day. The combination of childhood trauma, constant public scrutiny, exhaustion, and emotional isolation slowly pushed her toward breakdowns that would surface later in adulthood. Marie's personal life also reflected the instability she had carried internally for years. Although she married several times and built a large family, she later admitted that emotional pain and unresolved trauma continued shaping her relationships. After marrying Stephen Lyle Craig in 1982 and later Brian Blosill in 1986, she attempted to create the stable home life she never truly experienced emotionally as a child. But even motherhood could not erase the psychological effects of the abuse and relentless pressure she had carried for decades. Following pregnancy, Marie developed severe postpartum depression that left her physically and emotionally shattered. She described moments of overwhelming despair, exhaustion, uncontrollable crying, and frightening physical symptoms that sometimes left her unable to function. At one point, she impulsively drove for hours without knowing where she was going, desperately trying to escape the emotional collapse happening inside her mind. Despite those struggles, Marie continued working, performing, and presenting herself publicly as cheerful and composed. That disconnect between her public image and private suffering became one of the defining patterns of her life. In her memoir, Behind the Smile, she explained how exhausting it was to maintain the appearance of happiness while privately unraveling emotionally. Over time, she realized that trauma does not simply disappear because someone becomes successful or famous. The emotional damage remained buried beneath the surface for years, affecting her confidence, relationships, mental health, and sense of identity. One of the most significant turning points in Marie's healing journey came after she became a mother herself. Raising children forced her to confront painful memories she had avoided for decades. She later explained that motherhood gave her the courage to finally speak openly about the sexual abuse she experienced as a child. For years, even her own brothers reportedly had no idea what she had endured. Breaking that silence became both terrifying and liberating. Rather than focusing entirely on graphic details, Marie emphasized the long-term emotional consequences of abuse, the shame, fear, confusion, self-doubt, and psychological scars survivors often carry silently for years. In 2019, while appearing on The Talk, Marie spoke more openly than ever before about how childhood abuse affected her understanding of herself. She explained that the trauma had once convinced her she might be gay because she associated men with fear and danger. Over time, however, growing up surrounded by loving brothers and a supportive father slowly helped rebuild her trust in men and allowed her to separate her trauma from her identity. Those public conversations became important not only because Marie was sharing deeply personal truths, but because she represented a generation where abuse was rarely discussed openly. Her willingness to finally confront those experiences publicly resonated with many survivors who had spent years carrying similar pain in silence. Later interviews revealed an even deeper sense of closure. Marie eventually stated that the individuals responsible for abusing her were no longer alive and therefore no longer held power over her emotionally. That realization appeared to mark an important shift in her healing process. Rather than allowing the trauma to define her entire identity forever, she began reframing her life around survival, resilience, faith, and personal growth. Although the emotional scars never completely disappeared, she gradually found peace in speaking honestly about what happened instead of hiding it behind the carefully polished image the world had expected from her since childhood. Today, Marie Osmond's story stands as far more than the biography of a celebrity entertainer. It is also the story of someone who spent decades carrying invisible pain behind fame and success while struggling to reconcile public expectations with private suffering. Her willingness to speak openly about abuse, mental health, body image struggles, and emotional trauma transformed the way many people viewed her. Beneath the television lights and glamorous performances was a woman trying to survive experiences that shaped her long before the world ever knew her name. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.